Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, please subscribe because today we're talking about something that's often misunderstood and rarely discussed: openly emotional numbness, particularly as it relates to trauma. If you've ever felt like you're going through life on autopilot, like you're watching your own life from behind glass, or like you can't access emotions that you know should be there, this video is for you. Emotional numbness isn't laziness. It's not being cold or uncaring, and it's definitely not a personal failing. It's actually a sophisticated protective mechanism that your nervous system activates in response to overwhelming experiences. Today we're going to break down exactly what emotional numbness is, why it happens, how it shows up, and most importantly, why understanding it as a trauma response rather than a character flaw can completely change how you relate to yourself and begin healing. Let's start with what emotional numbness actually is, because it's more complex than just not feeling anything. Emotional numbness, clinically sometimes called emotional blunting or affect flattening, is a state where you experience a significant reduction in emotional intensity, or you lose access to emotions altogether. It's like someone turned down the volume on your emotional life. Things that used to make you happy do want to bring joy anymore. Things that should make you sad don't bring tears. Even things that should make you angry just feel flat and distant. You might go through significant life events, graduations, breakups, achievements, losses, and feel strangely disconnected from them, like you're an observer rather than a participant. You know intellectually how you should feel, but you can't access that feeling. And this disconnect between what you think you should feel and what you actually feel can be deeply distressing and confusing. Some people describe it as feeling hollow, empty, or like they're living in a fog. Others say it's like being wrapped in cotton wool, where everything is muffled and distant. The key thing to understand is that emotional numbness exists on a spectrum. For some people, it has a complete absence of feeling, while for others, it's more like emotions are there, but faint, far away, or require tremendous effort to access. Now, let's talk about why this happens. And this is where trauma comes in. Emotional numbness is what we call a dissociative response, which is one of the ways your nervous system protects you from psychological overwhelm. When you experience something traumatic, and trauma can range from a single overwhelming event to chronic stress, neglect, emotional abuse, or living in an unpredictable or unsafe environment, your nervous system has to manage an impossible situation. You're experiencing more pain, fear, or stress than you can psychologically process, and your system can't escape the situation physically. So it creates an internal escape by shutting down emotional processing. It's essentially your brain saying, "This is too much. We can't handle the full intensity of these feelings right now. So we're going to turn down the volume or shut off emotions entirely to protect you from being completely overwhelmed." This is actually an incredibly intelligent survival mechanism. In the moment of trauma, being flooded with intense emotions could prevent you from doing what you need to do to survive, whether that's escaping danger, making critical decisions, or just getting through another day in an unbearable situation. So your nervous system does triage. It prioritizes basic functioning over emotional processing, and it puts your emotions on pause. The problem is, sometimes that pause button gets stuck, and even after the traumatic situation has passed, your nervous system remains in this protective shutdown state because it learned that emotions are dangerous, overwhelming, or unsafe. Here's what's happening in your brain during emotional numbness. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in emotional regulation, essentially overrides and suppresses activity in the limbic system, which is where emotions are generated and processed. It's like your rational brain is working overtime to keep your emotional brain offline. Additionally, there's often reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps you identify and differentiate emotions. Your brain is quite literally creating less emotional signal, and the signal it does create is being suppressed before it reaches your conscious awareness. The rest also usually decrease connectivity between different brain regions that need to communicate for you to fully experience emotion. So even if an emotional response is generated somewhere in your brain, it's not integrating into a complete emotional experience that you can recognize and feel. This is something you redo unconsciously or can just decide to stop it an automatic neurological process. Let's talk about the different contexts in which emotional numbness shows up as a trauma response. Sometimes it develops during the traumatic experience itself. This is called paratraumatic dissociation. For example, someone going through abuse might describe feeling like they left their body, like they were watching it happen to someone else, like time slowed down or sped up, or like they couldn't feel the pain or fear that should have been there. This in-the-moment numbing is your brain's emergency protocol activating, but emotional numbness can also develop after the traumatic event has ended, sometimes years later. This is particularly common with complex PTSD, which develops from prolonged or repeated trauma. You might have felt your feelings during the traumatic period because you had to. You were in survival mode, but once you finally safe, your nervous system doesn't know how to come back online. So it stays in that protective shutdown state. It's like your brain is still preparing for danger by keeping emotions suppressed, even though the danger has passed. Emotional numbness is also closely related to depression, and in fact, it's one of the core symptoms of major depressive disorder. But the numbness that comes from trauma has a slightly different quality. It's not just that positive emotions are reduced, it's that all emotions feel inaccessible or distant. And it often comes with a sense of disconnection from yourself and reality that's more characteristic of disassociation than pure depression. Often trauma survivors experience both depression and dissociative numbness, and they feed into each other in complicated ways. Now, let's look at how emotional numbness actually shows up in daily life, because it's not always obvious. You might notice that you can't cry even when you want to, like the tears just won't come, no matter how sad the situation is. You might feel disconnected in relationships, unable to feel the love or connection you know you have for people intellectually. Intimacy might feel impossible, because vulnerability requires emotional access that you don't have. You might make decisions without any emotional input, operating purely on logic because feelings aren't available to guide you. You might watch sad movies or hear tragic news and feel nothing, which then makes you feel guilty or wonder if something is fundamentally wrong with you. You might feel like you're performing emotions rather than feeling them, smiling because you know you should, saying, "I'm fine," because you don't actually know what you feel. Some people describe it as going through the motions of life without any sense of meaning, purpose, or engagement. And here's something really important. Emotional numbness often alternates with periods of intense emotional overwhelm. Your emotions don't disappear permanently. They get suppressed and build up pressure. And then sometimes they break through in overwhelming floods that feel uncontrollable. So you might have long stretches of feeling nothing, punctuated by episodes where you feel everything all at once, which is exhausting and frightening. This pattern is very typical of trauma responses. Let's talk about why emotional numbness persists, even after trauma, because this is something people often don't understand. You might be in a safe situation now. You might have removed yourself from harmful circumstances. So why doesn't the numbness just go away? The answer is that your nervous system has learned that emotions are dangerous, based on past experience. When emotions were associated with traumatic experiences that you couldn't escape or process, your brain formed an association. Emotions equal danger, threat, or overwhelm. So now, even when emotions arise in safe contexts, your brain's automatic response is to shut them down because it's operating from that old programming. Additionally, sometimes people develop secondary trauma around the emotional numbness itself. If you tried to express emotions in the past and were punished, dismissed, or overwhelmed yourself, then feeling emotions becomes scary in its own right. Or if you experience such intense emotional pain during trauma that it felt like it would destroy you, your brain decides that all intense emotion needs to be prevented to keep you safe. So the numbness becomes self-perpetuating. You're numb because emotions feel unsafe, and emotions continue to feel unsafe because you're not able to practice experiencing them in manageable, safe ways. There's also something called emotional avoidance, which is slightly different from automatic numbing, but often coexists with it. This is when you've developed habits or strategies to avoid situations, thoughts, or experiences that might trigger emotions. Maybe you stay busy constantly, use substances, avoid certain topics, or distract yourself as soon as you start to feel something. These avoidance strategies reinforce the numbing by preventing emotional processing. So what do you do about emotional numbness? First, and most importantly, please hear this. You need professional help for trauma-related emotional numbness, particularly trauma-focused therapy like EMDR, somatic experiencing, or sensory-motor psychotherapy. These approaches work specifically with the nervous system and body to help process trapped trauma and gradually restore emotional capacity in safe, detached walls. Trying to force yourself to feel emotions or pushing through numbness without support can actually be the healing process is about slowly building your capacity to tolerate emotions, creating safety in your nervous system, and processing the traumatic material that your emotions are still trying to protect you from. This isn't quick or linear. It requires patience and professional guidance. That said, there are some things that can support this process. Somatic practices that focus on body awareness rather than thinking, like gentle yoga, mindful movement, or body scans, can help you start reconnecting with physical sensations, which is often the first step toward reconnecting with emotions, since emotions have a physical component. Creative expression through art, music, or writing can sometimes access emotions that verbal processing cannot. Building safety and predictability in your life helps your nervous system relax enough to allow emotions back online. Connecting with supportive people who can tolerate emotions without judgment creates relational safety that makes feeling safer. And sometimes medication can be helpful, not to create emotions, but to support your nervous system's capacity to regulate them. One more critical thing. Please have compassion for yourself and your emotional numbness. It saved you when you needed saving. It's not something to shame yourself for or be angry about it. It's evidence that your brain was doing everything it could to protect you from psychological destruction. The numbness isn't the enemy. It was the solution your system came up with given impossible circumstances. Healing means gradually helping your system understand that emotions can be safe now, that you have resources and capacity you didn't have during the trauma, and that you can handle feelings in doses without being overwhelmed or destroyed. If this video resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to understand this, and drop a comment. If you feel comfortable sharing your experience, just hearing other people's stories can be incredibly validating when you're dealing with something as isolating as emotional numbness. And please, if you're experiencing this, reach out to a trauma-informed therapist. You deserve support, and emotional numbness is absolutely something that can heal with the right help. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.